Marcus Chun stared at his laptop screen, watching his bank account balance mock him with its pathetic 2-digit number. The freelance graphic design business wasn't exactly booming, and his Chicago loft rent was due in 3 days. He'd been living off ramen noodles and instant coffee for 2 weeks, desperately searching for a roommate who wouldn't turn his converted warehouse space into a disaster zone. Thunder crashed outside his floor-to-ceiling windows, followed by sheets of rain that hammered against the glass like nature's own percussion section. The storm had knocked out power to half the building, leaving Marcus working by candlelight, and the pale glow of his battery-powered laptop. Perfect timing for his creative block to hit. A sharp knock echoed through the loft, making Marcus jump. He wasn't expecting anyone, especially not during this weather. Through the security monitor, he saw a woman standing in the hallway, completely dry despite the storm raging outside. Her dark hair fell in perfect waves over a leather jacket that looked expensive enough to pay his rent twice over. "Can I help you?" Marcus called through the intercom. "I understand you have a room available," she replied. Her voice carried an odd formality, like English wasn't her first language, though her accent was unplaceable. Marcus buzzed her up, curiosity overriding caution. When he opened the door, he found himself staring at someone who seemed to step out of a different era entirely. She was perhaps 30, with sharp cheekbones and eyes so dark they appeared almost black. Everything about her screamed expensive, from her perfectly tailored clothes to the way she carried herself. "I'm Vera Nightshade," she said, extending a hand. Her grip was firm, almost unnaturally so. "I'm interested in the room." "Marcus Chun," he replied, still processing her unusual name. "Would you like to see it?" As they walked through the loft, Marcus noticed Vera moved with predatory grace, her eyes constantly scanning their surroundings like she was memorizing every detail. She paused at his workstation, studying the half-finished logo designs on his. Multiple monitors. "Interesting work," she murmured. "You have a gift for seeing patterns others miss." Marcus felt heat creep up his neck. "It's just commercial stuff. Nothing special." Vera's laugh was musical, but somehow hollow. "You'd be surprised what seemingly ordinary things can change the world." The spare room was basically a large space with exposed brick walls, industrial lighting, and windows overlooking the Chicago River. Marcus had shown it to dozen potential roommates, who all found something to complain about. Too industrial, too cold, too expensive at $800 a month plus utilities. Vera examined the room for exactly 30 seconds. "This will suffice," she said, pulling an envelope from her jacket. 6 months in advance, as discussed. Marcus blinked. "We didn't discuss. $4,800, Vera continued, handing him the envelope. "I trust this covers the first 6 months plus utilities?" Marcus opened the envelope and nearly dropped it. Crisp $100 bills, more cash than he'd seen in years. "This is ... Are you sure? Most people want to negotiate or... I prefer simple transactions," Vera said. "When can I move in?" "Whenever you want, I guess. Don't you need to see references or... Tonight would be ideal." Marcus laughed nervously. "Tonight? In this storm?" Vera glanced toward the windows where lightning illuminated the torrential rain. "Weather doesn't concern me." 2 hours later, Marcus watched in bewilderment as Vera moved in with a single black suitcase. No furniture, no boxes, no normal belongings. Just one perfectly organized suitcase that seemed impossibly light given its size. "That's everything?" Marcus asked. "I live minimally," Vera replied. "I won't disturb your routine." That first night, Marcus lay awake, listening to the storm and wondering about his mysterious new roommate. He'd been so desperate for rent money that he hadn't asked the right questions. What kind of work did she do? Why pay so much up front? And why did she seem completely unaffected by the violent weather outside? Around 3 a.m., Marcus was startled awake by the sound of his electronics powering on simultaneously. His computer monitors flickered to life, displaying streams of code he didn't recognize. His phone buzzed with incoming data that made no sense: coordinates, timestamps, and symbols that hurt his eyes to look at. Then, as suddenly as it started, everything went silent and dark. In the morning, Marcus found Vera in the kitchen, perfectly dressed despite the early hour. She was holding a cup of coffee, but never seemed to drink from it. "Sleep well?" she asked. Marcus rubbed his eyes. "Did you hear anything weird last night?" "My electronics went crazy around 3. Vera's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her dark eyes. "Electronics can be unpredictable during storms," she said carefully. "Perhaps you should have them checked." But Marcus had been working with computers his entire life. What happened last night wasn't a power surge or storm interference. It was like his devices had been communicating with something else entirely. Something that had arrived with Vera Nightshade. 3 days after Vera moved in, Marcus's world turned upside down. He was working on a client's logo when Vera burst through the door, her usual composure shattered. Blood trickled from a cut on her forehead, and her leather jacket bore scorch. Marks that looked like they came from some kind of energy weapon. "We need to leave." "Now," she said, grabbing his arm with surprising strength. "What happened to you? Should we call the police?" Vera's laugh was bitter. "The police can't help us, Marcus. Not where we're going." She moved to the window, scanning the street below with practiced efficiency. "I need to tell you something that will sound impossible, but your life depends on believing me." Marcus pulled away from her grip. "You're scaring me, Vera. What's going on?" "My name is Vera Nightshade, and I'm from the year 2157, she said, turning to face him. "I'm a temporal agent sent to protect you because in 18 months, you're going to create something that changes the course of human history." Marcus stared at her. "You're insane." "Am I?" Vera reached into her jacket and pulled out a device that looked like a smartphone crossed with a medical scanner. The screen displayed Marcus's vital signs in real time, along with data streams he couldn't understand. "This is reading your genetic markers, your neural patterns, your creative potential. You're not just a graphic designer, Marcus. You're going to invent a form of quantum encryption that makes time travel possible." Before Marcus could respond, the building's windows exploded inward. To the shower of glass stepped a man who seemed to bend light around himself. He was tall, lean, with silver hair and eyes like frozen mercury. His clothes appeared to shift and shimmer, adapting to his surroundings like active camouflage. "Found you," he said in a voice that carried an odd echo, as if he were speaking from multiple time periods simultaneously. Vera stepped protectively in front of Marcus. "Cade Blackthorne, I should have known they'd send you." "The temporal councils." "Patience has limits, Vera," Cade replied, raising his hand. Energy crackled between his fingers. "A boy dies today, and the timeline corrects itself." "Marcus isn't just some boy," Vera snapped. "He's the key to humanity's survival." "He's the key to humanity's destruction," Cade countered. "His encryption. Technology doesn't just enable time travel, it enables temporal warfare. Entire civilizations wiped from existence, causality itself weaponized." Marcus watched this exchange with growing terror. "This is insane. I design Logos. I can barely balance my checkbook." Cade's mercury eyes fixed on him. "In 14 months and 6 days, you'll have a breakthrough while working on a data visualization project. You'll discover a pattern in quantum mechanics that allows information to exist outside linear time. That discovery kills 3 billion people across 17 different timelines." "Enough," Vera said, her own device materializing in her hand, a weapon that hummed with deadly energy. "Marcus makes his own choices. The battle that followed lasted only seconds, but seemed to stretch across hours. Cade moved like liquid mercury, his form blurring as he attacked from multiple angles simultaneously. Vera fought with inhuman speed, her weapon carving lines of brilliant light through the air. The very fabric of reality seemed to warp around them. Marcus dove for cover behind. His desk, his mind reeling. This couldn't be real. Time travelers didn't exist. People didn't fight with weapons made of light while having conversations about quantum encryption and temporal warfare. But as Cade's energy blast vaporized his computer monitors, Marcus felt something click in his mind. The patterns he'd been seeing in his design work, the way certain mathematical sequences seemed to call to him. Suddenly, it all made sense. The data streams, he whispered. The ones you've been sending to my electronics. They're not random. They're showing me the structure of time itself. Vera glanced back at him, momentarily distracted. You're beginning to understand. That moment of inattention was all Cade needed. His strike sent Vera crashing through the brick wall into the neighboring unit. She struggled to rise, her weapon sparking and failing. Goodbye, Marcus Chun, Cade said, energy building around his raised hand. Marcus closed his eyes, certain he was about to die. Instead, he felt Vera's hand grab his shoulder. Hold tight, she gasped. We're jumping. The world dissolved into streams of light and impossible geometries. Marcus felt his consciousness stretched across centuries, witnessing the rise and fall of civilizations in the space between heartbeats. Then reality snapped back into focus, and they were standing in an alley that looked like Chicago but different. The buildings were the same, but the cars were strange, antique models he'd only seen in museums. Welcome to 1924, Vera said, leaning heavily against a brick wall. Cade will find us eventually, but temporal jumps require time to recharge. We have maybe 6 hours. Marcus looked around in wonder and terror. The sounds were different, no electronic hum of modern life, just horses, early automobiles, and human voices. This is real. Time travel is actually real. More real than you know, said a voice from the shadows. An elderly man emerged, wearing a long coat and carrying a walking stick that seemed to shimmer with its own light. And you've just made this timeline infinitely more dangerous. Dr. Thorne Ashworth was not what Marcus had expected from a time traveler. The elderly man moved with a scholar's careful gait, his wild white hair and thick spectacles giving him the appearance of an absent-minded professor. But his eyes held depths that spoke of centuries of accumulated knowledge. Dr. Ashworth has been tracking temporal anomalies across multiple eras. Vera explained as they followed him through the maze of 1924 Chicago's underground tunnels. He's been trying to map the damage being done to the timeline. Damage that you're making worse with every jump, Ashworth said, his accent carrying traces of British formality mixed with something more exotic. The temporal fabric wasn't designed for this kind of stress. Each time you leap through the centuries, you create ripples that compound exponentially. Marcus struggled to keep up, both physically and mentally. So we're trapped in the past. Not trapped, Ashworth replied, stopping before a heavy metal door marked with symbols that hurt Marcus's eyes to look at directly. But every option carries consequences. Cade Blackthorne isn't just hunting you. He's trying to prevent a war that will span millennia. The door opened into a laboratory that shouldn't have existed in 1924. Devices that looked like they belonged centuries in the future, hummed alongside brass instruments and clockwork mechanisms. Charts covered every wall, showing branching timelines that spread like a vast tree. I've been here since 2203, Ashworth continued, moving to a massive calculating engine that clicked and whirred as it processed impossible equations, studying what your invention actually does to causality itself. Vera examined the charts with growing alarm. These timeline branches, there are thousands of them. each representing a different outcome based on Marcus's choices. Ashworth. Confirmed. In some, his encryption enables beneficial time travel medical interventions, historical research, preventing natural disasters. But in others, ... He gestured to a section of the chart, painted in alarming red. Temporal warfare. Time becomes a battlefield where entire civilizations are retroactively erased. Marcus sank into a chair that seemed to adjust itself to his body. So Cade is right? I should be stopped? The situation is more complex than that, Ashworth said gently. You see, in the timelines where you're eliminated, humanity faces a different threat entirely. Without your encryption, we remain vulnerable to something far worse than temporal war. Before he could explain further, alarms began wailing throughout the laboratory. The calculating engine's clicking accelerated to a frantic rhythm. He's found us, Vera said, her weapon appearing in her hand. Cade must have used a probability matrix to narrow down our location. Impossible, Ashworth protested. This facility exists outside normal temporal flow. It should be invisible to... The wall exploded inward, revealing Cade Blackthorne stepping through what appeared to be a tear in reality itself. But he wasn't alone. Behind him came a figure that made Marcus's blood freeze, a woman who looked exactly like Vera, but wrong somehow. Her eyes held a cold emptiness, and when she moved, she left afterimages in the air. Hello, sister, the false Mara said. Vera's face went white. Nix, I thought the Council had you contained. The Council has many secrets, Cade said, including the fact that you weren't sent to protect Marcus Chun. You were sent to study him while Nix here eliminates him. That's not true, Vera protested, but uncertainty flickered in her voice. Nix smiled with predatory satisfaction. The protection mission was always a cover story. Vera, the Council needed someone Marcus would trust while I prepared for the actual termination. You've served your purpose. The battle erupted across multiple dimensions simultaneously. Nix fought with Vera's skills, but none of her restraint. Her attacks designed to kill rather than subdue. Cade engaged Ashworth in what appeared to be a duel of temporal mathematics. Each wielding equations like weapons. Marcus found himself caught in the crossfire, dodging energy blasts while trying to process the betrayal. Had Vera been lying to him all along? Was she really just studying him for the Council's benefit? Then he saw it in the chaos of battle. A pattern emerged in the way energy moved through the laboratory. The same quantum structures he'd been unconsciously incorporating into his design work. For the first time since this nightmare began, Marcus felt he understood something. Stop, he shouted, stepping into the center of the battle. Everyone stop. To his amazement, they did. All four combatants froze, staring at him in surprise. You're all wrong, Marcus said, the knowledge flowing through him like revelation. The encryption isn't the weapon or the defense. It's the key to something else entirely. Something that's been trying to communicate with us across time. As if summoned by his words, the laboratory filled with a presence that made the air itself seem to sing. And in that moment, Marcus realized they weren't just dealing with time travel. They were dealing with something that existed outside time altogether. The presence that filled Dr. Ashworth's laboratory felt ancient beyond measure, like standing in the shadow of a mountain that existed before the first stars ignited. Marcus could see it now, or rather, see the way it bent space around itself, creating impossible geometries that made his eyes water. Finally, the entity spoke, its voice harmonizing across frequencies that shouldn't exist. The pattern seer begins to understand. Vera and Nix had stopped fighting, both staring at Marcus, with expressions of dawning realization. Even Cade lowered his weapon, his mercury eyes reflecting something that might have been fear. What is that? Vera whispered. Dr. Ashworth was frantically checking his instruments, his face pale. Temporal displacement readings are off the charts. This entity, it's not from any when. It exists in the spaces between moments. The paradox feeder, Cade said, his voice hollow. The Council's classified files mentioned it, but we thought it was just theoretical. A new voice cut through the tension, young, female, and heartbreakingly familiar, despite Marcus having never heard it before. It's not theoretical. It's been manipulating the timeline for centuries, feeding on the contradictions we create every time we try to fix things. The speaker materialized from what looked like a crack in the air itself. She was perhaps 20, with Marcus's eyes, but silver hair that moved like liquid starlight. She wore clothes that seemed woven from solidified time, constantly shifting between past and future fashions. "Who are you?" Marcus asked, though something deep in his heart already knew. "Zara Moonhaven," she replied. "Your daughter from a timeline that doesn't exist anymore. I'm what's left of the world you would have saved if you'd made different choices." Vera's weapon trembled in her hand. "That's impossible. We checked all the future projections. Marcus doesn't have children in any timeline we mapped." "Because you've been looking at the wrong timelines," Zara said sadly. "Every time someone jumps through time to prevent disaster, they create new paradoxes. The paradox feeder grows stronger with each contradiction. It's been orchestrating this entire scenario, your mission to protect Marcus, Cade's mission to eliminate him, even Nyx's betrayal." The entity's presence pulsed with satisfaction. Marcus felt its attention turn toward him like a searchlight made of pure concept. "The pattern seer understands now," it said. "Each timeline created by your choices feeds me. Success, failure, paradox, resolution, all are sustenance. Your encryption doesn't enable time travel. It enables me to exist more fully in your reality." Dr. Ashworth's calculating engine began smoking as it tried to process the implications. The quantum signatures. Every time we use temporal technology, we're not just moving through time. We're giving this thing more access to causality itself. Marcus felt the weight of infinite possibilities pressing down on him. In his mind, he could see the branching paths, every choice that led to different futures, all of them ultimately serving the entity's hunger for contradiction. "So what's the solution?" he asked. "If every option feeds it, how do we stop it?" Zara stepped forward, her form beginning to flicker like a disrupted transmission. "There's only one way. Someone has to become the anchor exists simultaneously in all timelines to collapse them into a single stable reality. But the process ... destroys the anchor," Vera finished, understanding flooding her expression. "You'd have to spread your consciousness across infinite possibilities. You'd still exist, but not as an individual person anymore." "That's why I'm here," Zara said, looking at her father with love and profound sadness. "In my timeline, you made that choice. But it wasn't enough because you waited too long." The paradox feeder had grown too strong. Cade holstered his weapon completely. "The Council never told us about this scenario. We've been fighting each other while the real enemy manipulated us all." "Because the Council doesn't exist in timelines where the feeder wins," Zara explained. "It erases organizations that might pose a threat to it. That's why you've been getting conflicting orders, why Vera's mission parameters changed, why everything feels like it's falling apart. The entity has been editing reality in real time." The laboratory began to shake as the paradox feeder's attention intensified. Marcus could feel it probing at his mind, trying to understand the quantum encryption patterns that existed in his consciousness. But for the first time since this nightmare began, he wasn't afraid. "I can feel it," he said quietly. "The pattern behind all the patterns. It's not just about time travel or encryption. It's about consciousness itself, the way awareness creates reality through observation." "Marcus, no," Vera said, recognizing the determination in his voice. "There has to be another way." But Marcus was already moving toward the entity's presence, his mind opening to the quantum structures that had been calling to him his entire life. The encryption was never meant for machines. It was meant for minds, to allow consciousness to exist outside the normal flow of causality. As understanding dawned, Marcus realized that everything, his financial struggles, meeting Vera, the time travel chase, even this moment of revelation, had been orchestrated, not by the paradox feeder, but by his own future consciousness, reaching back through time to ensure this moment would happen. "I'm not becoming the anchor," he said with sudden certainty. "I already am the anchor. I always have been." Reality shifted around Marcus like a kaleidoscope rotating through dimensions of possibility. He could see all the timelines, now millions of branching paths spreading out from every decision point, each one feeding the paradox feeder's insatiable hunger for contradiction. But he could also see the underlying pattern that connected them all, the quantum substrate that made existence itself possible. "The encryption algorithm," he said, his voice echoing across multiple time streams simultaneously. "I didn't invent it. I discovered it. It's the fundamental code that consciousness uses to observe reality into existence." The paradox feeder pulsed with alarm as it realized what was happening. For the first time since the entity had begun manipulating the timeline, it was facing something it couldn't control or consume. "Impossible," it roared, its presence filling the laboratory with chaotic energy. "You are bound by causality like all temporal beings." "No," Marcus replied, his consciousness expanding to encompass multiple versions of himself across different timelines. "I'm not bound by causality. I am causality." Vera watched in awe and terror as Marcus began to glow with the same light she'd seen in her temporal scanning equipment. But this wasn't just energy, it was pure information, the quantum signatures of consciousness itself made visible. "Marcus, you don't understand what you're doing," she pleaded. "If you anchor the timelines, you'll lose yourself. You'll become something beyond human." "I'm not losing myself," Marcus said gently, his multiple voices harmonizing across time. "I'm becoming what I was always meant to be. The pattern keeper, the one who maintains the balance between possibility and actuality." Zara stepped forward, her form stabilizing as the timelines began to converge. "In my original timeline, you waited too long. The feeder had grown too powerful, infected too many realities. That's why I came back, to make sure you understood early enough to act." Dr. Ashworth's instruments were going wild, registering temporal fluctuations that should have torn reality apart. But instead of chaos, there was a growing sense of order, as if the universe itself was remembering how to be stable. "The paradoxes," Ashworth whispered in wonder. "They're resolving themselves. Every contradiction is finding balance." Cade and Nix stood together, their conflict forgotten in the face of something greater than their missions. "What happens to us?" Cade asked. "To our respective times?" "Time continues," Marcus replied, his consciousness now spanning centuries, but safely, without the constant manipulation and paradox creation. "A temporal council in your era will still exist, but they'll work to preserve stability rather than create it through conflict." The paradox feeder made one final attempt to maintain its hold on reality, lashing out with tendrils of pure contradiction. But Marcus was ready. He opened his mind fully to the quantum encryption patterns, allowing his consciousness to become the living embodiment of temporal stability. The entity's scream echoed across all of time as it found itself cut off from its food source. Without paradoxes to feed on, it began to fade, becoming just another piece of background radiation in the cosmic microwave background. "It's over," Vera said, watching as the oppressive presence finally dissipated. But Marcus... Marcus turned to look at her, and she gasped. He was still himself, still recognizably the graphic designer she'd come to protect. But his eyes now held depths that reflected infinity, and when he moved, she could see echoes of his actions rippling across multiple timelines. "I'm still me," he said, understanding her concern. "Just more me. I can perceive all the possibilities now, but I choose to maintain my anchor in this timeline, in this moment with all of you." "What about your daughter?" Vera asked, looking at Zara, who was becoming more solid as her timeline stabilized. "She exists," Marcus said with certainty. "Not in the way she did before, but in a better timeline. One where the choices I make are guided by wisdom rather than fear." Dr. Ashworth began shutting down his equipment, a smile of profound relief on his aged face. "The temporal stress readings are normalizing. The timeline is stabilizing into a single coherent stream for the first time in centuries. So we can go home?" Nix asked, and for the first time, she sounded young and uncertain rather than coldly efficient. "We can all go home," Marcus confirmed. "But remember, every choice creates ripples. The future isn't fixed, but it's no longer being manipulated by entities that feed on chaos. What we build from here is up to us." As the others prepared to return to their respective times, Vera lingered. "Will I see you again?" Marcus smiled, and for a moment he was just the struggling graphic designer who'd needed a roommate to pay rent. "I'm outside time now, Vera. I'll always be here when the timeline needs protection. And," he added with a grin, "I still need to finish that logo project I was working on when you first arrived." One by one, they departed Cade and Nix to their respective eras with new missions of preservation rather than destruction. Dr. Ashworth to his study of now stable temporal mechanics, and Zara to a timeline where she could grow up with a father who understood his true purpose. Vera was the last to leave. As she activated her temporal jump device, she looked back at Marcus one final time. "Thank you," she said simply. "Thank you," Marcus replied, "for giving me the chance to become who I really am." After she vanished, Marcus stood alone in the 1924 laboratory that was already beginning to fade as reality corrected itself. Soon he would be back in his Chicago loft, but he would never again be just a struggling graphic designer. He was the temporal guardian now, standing watch over the infinite possibilities of existence, ensuring that time itself remained a gift rather than a weapon. And somewhere in the quantum patterns that surrounded him, he could already see the first stirrings of the next threat that would require his protection. The timeline was safe, but the Guardian's work was just beginning.